Hi, virtual WonderCon. Welcome to Transformers Crossover and Rollout, our Transformers panel for this year. Thanks for, I guess, hanging tight for a couple months and waiting for this, but it's great to have you all here wherever you may be. Let me introduce you to all of our panelists. I'm going to go in the order they're appearing on my Zoom, which means it is random. I'll start with Sam Maggs. Maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit, but Sam is writing Transformers Galaxies 7 through 9, and which is a story featuring Gage, as well as some other characters, and writing a couple stories in Transformers My Little Pony as well. Sam, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Sam Maggs. I work a lot with IDW. I've written for Marvel Action Captain Marvel and My Little Pony and Star Trek and a bunch of other places, but right now I'm working a lot on Transformers. Yeah, so like John said, I've done Transformers 7 through 9, the first issue of which was supposed to be out June-ish, we'll see now. And then I've also done a couple of stories in, the awesome Transformers My Little Pony crossover. So it's been super fun. That's me.
All right. Simon Furman is a longtime Transformers writer, obviously one of my favorites, and he is currently writing Transformers 84 Secrets and Lies. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Simon.
Yeah, hi everyone. I've been writing Transformers for an indecent amount of time now, and I've also worked for I've worked for Marvel, for DC, for IDW, just about everybody over the years. And, really, it's just so great at the moment because I'm getting to revisit really where I started, which was right at the beginning of Transformers back in 1984.
Brian Ruckley is the writer of IDW's Transformers ongoing series. Issue 20 of which is the next one that is sitting printed somewhere waiting for a world that is ready for it. Brian?
Hi, yes. Writing the Transformers ongoing since feels like an eternity in a different world ago now, but since early last year. And having done a little bit of comic stuff for IDW before with Road Trooper and Highlander little series, but Transformers is the first big thing. And yeah, issue 20 is waiting to be released and is absolutely fantastic, I've got to say.
Yes. And David Mariotte is Transformers group or editor of the whole Transformers slew of titles, as well as the main writer on Transformers Terminator. David.
Hey there, I'm David. As John said, I am the editor of all Transformers titles and have the fine distinction of having edited everyone on the panel, as well as the co-writer of Transformers versus the Terminator, which is a big part of why we're doing a big crossover panel.
And the ponies. Yeah, so let's start with let's start with the crossovers. Since you brought it up like that, David. In general, David, what got you into Transformers? I actually met you when I wasn't working at IDW. I was freelance writing Transformers, and you were my editor all of a sudden. But you definitely came in with a lot of knowledge of Transformers.
Well, I am just the right age that I grew up watching Beast Wars, Transformers, and then Transformers Armada, and pretty much instantly got hooked on the franchise and have slowly amassed kind of a Transformers collection over the years. When I first came to IDW, I wanted to catch back up on the Transformers franchise because I had stopped reading around the time that Simon stopped writing the original run with us. And as I got caught up, I realized that I could buy more Transformers and justify them as a business expense. So here I was getting back into it in a major way.
Awesome. So what led to, what was the origin of the Transformers Terminator crossover?
The Transformers Terminator crossover comes from us having talked with our friends over at Dark Horse for many years, and of course talking to Hasbro and wanting to do a Transformers Terminator crossover. I mean, it's one of those things where it just sort of made sense and inherently works. They're two of the biggest, robot-focused properties in the entire world. They both take place in 1984 originally. There's a lot of similar elements, and frankly, it's a chance to have big, bombastic fun. So when we managed to get all the stars to align, it was a natural decision.
Yeah, no, that was one that I think we've been talking about for a really long time. I think going back to when I was editing Transformers, like some years ago, like that's something that's come up. It was always like really idle chatter. I always thought it was a cool idea. Like myself, speaking here, I'm also co-writing with David, but David I think deserves the majority of the credit for everything. But like, I was such a huge fan of the Terminator RoboCop comic in the I guess 90s that Frank Miller and Walter Simonson did. So I always knew there was like something kind of viable and cool to do, like with a crossover like that. And I think you hit the nail on the head for what to do with this one. Could you tell us a little bit about the premise of the?
Sure. The basic idea behind Transformers versus the Terminator is that the story of the Terminator was always about the underdogs in a roboticized society traveling back in time to try to secure their freedom and secure their future. And the story of the Transformers is always about the Decepticons trying to get the upper hand and become rulers of Earth. So why not have it that this time the Terminators, Skynet, the whole program is subservient to the Decepticons, and they're the ones traveling back in time to try to win their freedom. It's a really fun romp that I think gets to some, popcorn fun, but also deeper questions about like who and what is a sentient being, and what does freedom mean in the face of technology.
Sam, working on the Transformers MLP crossover, the My Little Pony crossover. Speaking of crossovers, how did that come about? How did you get involved in that?
It's funny hearing David talk about like how much sense it makes to like put Transformers and like Terminator together. It's like a perfect fit. Yeah, My Little Pony and Transformers make no sense together, which is actually what I think is so great about the crossover. It's just like totally bonkers in every way. So what had happened was my editor actually on My Little Pony, Megan Brown, had messaged me. So I've done a couple of issues of My Little Pony. I've done a couple of issues of Transformers. So it seemed like a good fit. And they sort of asked for ideas for how these two worlds could come together, and then other stories you could tell within that world. And there are a bunch of other really talented writers and artists on the series. We've got Ian Flynn, we've got James Asmus, Tony Fleeks, and Jack Lawrence. And together they came up with this sort of idea of how there's a sky bridge between these two. Honestly, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how the two worlds connect. It's going to be funny and cute, but ultimately what happens is, Transformers end up in Equestria. And so it was really fun to sort of exercise those brain muscles and try to think about, well, what do these characters really have in common? What do these worlds really have in common? What's everybody trying to get? And I think at the end of the day, really, the Cybertronians and the ponies are just trying to find people they relate to, who they can be friends with, and who they can connect with. So I had a lot of fun pairing Transformers, like individual Transformers, with ponies and thinking who would have a lot of fun together. So my two stories are Rainbow Dash and Windblade, who I thought would have a lot of fun high-flying adventures, and Gage and Pinkie Pie, because they're total opposites. Gage basically doesn't know how to have any emotions, and Pinkie Pie has like 100% emotions. So that was really fun.
So yeah, and that's another one that we had gone down that road of doing Transformers My Little Pony for a long time. It's been something we talked about. We'd done covers of it years and years ago. And I actually don't know how much this is known. We came so close to doing this as a series, like maybe 6 years ago. We had previews ads made. My old friend Georgia Ball was writing it. She'd written Transformers: Robots in Disguise, the tie into the cartoon show, not the other series. And it was it wound up just not coming together at kind of the last minute, and it was a real turnaround. The idea came up again recently to kind of do it in a different way than we were originally going to do, and I was super excited to see that come in. So you were working on ponies already, Sam, but what was your, and I know you were also you came into it via the pony side, I guess, sort of,
Mm-hmm.
but what's your background with Transformers?
It's funny. I think David and I are probably, David's over here on my screen. Actually, everybody, let's play this game. Everybody point at David.
Oh,
hilarious.
We're all reversed.
Oh, yes, it doesn't make any sense. It's all good stuff. Zoom fun. I think David and I are the same age-ish. I'm like I'm 31. So I also grew up, I also grew up with Beast Wars, except I grew up in Canada, so we called it Beasties. I'm titled differently there for some reason, but that was my introduction into the franchise. I was a big Reboot fan as well, and both of those shows were produced by the same studio in Vancouver, so it was a little piece of, I felt like it was a piece of Canadian culture. It wasn't until I was much older and moved to the States that I realized that a lot of people down here had watched those shows too. So that was my entry in it. But when I started thinking about what I wanted to do for Transformers Galaxies, Transformers has the same, I don't want to say affliction, but the same situation that many 80s cartoons and franchises had, which was like the Smurfette syndrome, where there was like the girl and then all of the dudes, and I was always like, oh man, I wish there was more than like one girl for every 17 dude Transformers. Like, it made me feel pretty bummed out. So when I started writing for Galaxies, I was like, I want to make a new girl Transformer. I want it to be all girl Transformers, because I think there are a ton of lady Transformers fans like me. So I want it to feel as welcoming and relatable to gals as possible, because there are so many great stories that have been told and to be told in the Transformers universe. So
cool. Yeah, I was going to use Beast. Well, no, actually, Beast Wars might be a good transition over to Simon, because you worked on that among the infinite number of things you worked on. But also, I was going to make a joke about you crossing over Transformers with the 1980s. But I don't know if that was actually a joke that works. But the amount of stuff. I mean, I don't know. Like, presumably, a lot of people watching this are familiar with Transformers, but you know, the stuff you wrote in the Transformers UK series originally, and then in the US series was, or the comic book series, I mean, was you know, very, let's say very influential, to put it a little mildly, on the shape the franchise took, and the shape that you know, some future writers, and definitely myself included, would approach stuff. So I guess we'll get into how did you get into Transformers, but what's it like now balancing something that's still modern written with something that has a root in some sort of a story in the past? And I say that as, couldn't be more excited to read a Simon Furman story set on Cybertron during the war. Like, that's a happy place for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. When I started working on Transformers, it really was as new as could be. You know, I'd never heard of it really when I walked into the offices of Marvel UK and they said, here are a bunch of toys, here's some scripts of the American series, go away and write some stories because we need to fill some space in our issues. So it was as entry level, and I was under the assumption it would last about a year, the way toy properties often did back then. So, you know, I had almost no investment in it, strangely, and yet it became to be so important. But that freed us up really to tell, we just went ahead and told the kind of stories back then that I would have wanted to read as a comic reader, you know, regardless of whether they were robots, regardless of whether they were toys. It was just tell some stories that hopefully will have some impact, will engage the readership. And we were blessed in the UK because whereas Bob Budiansky in the US, I think, was tied more to the toy releases and the Hasbro dictates, such as they were, about where the story could go, we were slightly off the leash a little bit, and we just told stories. We told these mad stories that were inspired by my love for Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's stories that I'd grown up reading. And so they all became very rapidly massive time-traveling gods and monsters things, and we just went crazy with it. And you know, did we ever think that here we are 35 years later talking about these stories and me revisiting those original stories? It's kind of crazy and still freaks me out when I think about it. But you know, I love this idea that 35 years in, there was this invitation to go back right to the very beginning and I mean, originally it started off as, well, can we tell a prequel to issue 1 of the US series? And I was kind of like, well, they're at peace. You know, what can I do with that really? And I talked to David and we threw some ideas back and forth. And the idea became, because the beginning of Marvel America US issue 1 is so rapid fire, there's so many spaces we could just fill in with story that we never saw, things we didn't know about. You know, literally the secrets and lies of the title became where we were going with this, just filling in the gaps.
Cool. Yeah, and it's a different take than the last time you sort of revisited that world, which was you coming on the other end of that series with Transformers Regeneration 1, which was telling a new, telling an ending to that world. Right, this is a chance to kind of go back to the beginning.
Yeah, this was a little more difficult in some ways because we didn't want to mess with what was there. We didn't want to sort of, you know, Transformers fans, as we all know, are such that they don't like you pulling away the building blocks that have created the franchise. So we wanted to be very careful not to contradict anything, but also at the same time tell something new and interesting within that framework. So the challenge became to slot between those gaps and maybe find different angles. And, you know, in Punch, Counterpunch, we found a great mechanic for the story, an omniscient narrator and somebody who's involved in it at the same time. And he could beautifully fill in all the bits that didn't require us to say, and then this happened and that happened, because he's there to fill in those gaps. And yet he could also reveal all the things we didn't know. So, you know, just a few little mechanics. And then, you know, I talked to David, and can we somehow link that into the UK stories? And we managed to somehow loop in Man of Iron, which was the very first Transformers UK story, into this, you know, behind the scenes secrets, what happened you didn't know, and somehow link it all together. And, you know, I don't know how we kind of got it, but somehow we pulled it all together. And then, you know, the great thing was we got to do more, because I knew right from off the bat, and talked to David about it at the time, there's more here. There's other places we can go. And it's great to have this 4-issue series to fill in join all those other dots.
I know somewhere out there is at least one Transformers fan who is extremely excited to finally get his Punch Counterpunch story, and you know who you are, and I know you're watching this. Brian, so you've been writing the IDW ongoing Transformers series for a little less than 2 years now, because we were ramping up the sort of pre-production on it right around when I came on as editor-in-chief, and I was on the tail end of the previous run, James Roberts and I were wrapping. What brought you to Transformers at that point, and what did you bring to Transformers?
Well, I guess, I mean, the simplest, honest answer to what brought me to Transformers was an email from an editor at IDW, because I was in touch with various folks at IDW, having done a bit of work for them. And one day you just get an email saying, just wondered if you had any interest in Transformers. without saying what it was about or anything like that. So, you know, I assumed it was somewhat smaller scale than what it eventually turned out to be. But obviously, you know, you say yes to an email like that because I don't have quite the depth and history of Transformers fandom that some people do. And I'm slightly older than Sam and David, so I mean, my awareness of them actually goes a bit further back than Beast Wars and so on. But it's always been a franchise I've been aware of and been interested in, and you know, followed in various manifestations over quite a long time. It sounds terrible to say it in this context, but I promise it's true that what actually made me a fan of Transformers before I got this email was that I was reading IDW's Transformers comics, particularly More Than Meets the Eye and Robots in Disguise, and loved them. Just as
Brian, you already have the job. You don't
yeah, I know, it's pathetic,
fine.
isn't it? Absolutely pathetic.
You don't have to pretend you read Robots in Disguise as well. That's okay.
No, I did. I know. Glutton for punishment or something. No, but I loved it. And you do get, there is something, now that I'm to some extent on the inside of it, there is something a bit intoxicating about this gigantic universe and ridiculously large cast of characters. And as Simon said, 35 years of layered sort of history and different takes on it and different angles on it and all these different threads. And, you know, everything is in there somewhere in the history of the Transformers franchise, every style, every tone, every approach. I mean, I even think, although Sam said it makes no sense to cross over with My Little Pony, I think you can make a perfectly good case that there's a strong tradition in some versions of the Transformers franchise of this emphasis on friendship and found friendship and loyalty and, you know, nobility and all this kind of stuff that does have a kind of resonance with a lot of My Little Pony stuff. So there is a kind of fit there. And if you, I still reckon that if you pick your way through all the layers of Transformers history and versions, you can find something in there that you could connect to almost any other franchise and do a crossover of almost anything. So I kind of came into all this just with the fairly generous and pleasing offer of a relatively blank slate to just try and reimagine the universe and start some new stories, set some new balls rolling. And I was in the lucky position of kind of picking and choosing elements from other versions and just trying to not change everything, but just give a slightly different spin to various elements of the mythos and the history and a lot of the characters.
So where issue 20 is the next issue that'll be coming out very soon. I would suspect June, but we'll
Touch wood.
We'll see where the world's at. That's where I think it's going to be. So where are we in that story? It's part 2 of Rise of the Decepticons. Is the ideal point to have a break between 2 chapters of a story is between chapters 1 and 2. So I think we lucked out there.
Yeah, it would have been perfect if it had been between 18 and 19.
Yeah.
I think so. We got close to perfection, but not quite.
Where is the story now? Where is the story of Transformers at that point?
Well, it's kind of on the brink because I don't know how many people watching this will be familiar with it, but the kind of premise and the starting point for the whole series was that it's set on Cybertron before the big famous inevitable war between Autobots and Decepticons has kicked off. So it's clearly, without too many spoilers, it's building up to a bit of a breakdown and an explosion, and we're kind of on the brink as it happens, sort of with issues 19 and 20 are kind of, in a way, they're the turning point where the title of the arc is The Rise of the Decepticons, and within the next few issues, we'll have some Decepticons risen to quite a high level, and quite a bit of chaos ensuing. So we're kind of closing in on the turning point of the series, I guess.
And issue 18, which you mentioned earlier, that actually leads like directly into issue 7 of Transformers Galaxies, right? Like they're kind of Galaxies. Sam's story follows directly after that, right?
Basically, yeah. I mean, it's a direct continuation. Yeah.
How did, for both of you, how did you two coordinate that? And David too, who was involved with that. Like, how do you, with a number of different writers? I mean, having been there myself on Transformers, but like, how do you guys go about, you folks go about combining those or working together on that?
That's what David's for, so he should answer that question.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of editorial direction and making sure people are looped in with everything. I know Sam saw various versions of the issue 18 script and then the final product. I know Brian saw Sam's pitch for what Galaxies 7 through 9 would be before 18 was written. But honestly, this one was kind of easy because it was such a matter of just confluence of good ideas. Literally within like a week of each other, I think, is when Brian pitched issue 18 and Sam pitched 7 through 9 without knowing what the other one was doing. And it just worked out so beautifully.
Yeah, it's like that thing where like studios make Deep Impact and Armageddon at the same time, and it's kind of like it was a total fluke. It was it happened. Like David said, they happen completely independent of each other. And I remember getting notes back on my pitch for Galaxies from David being like, "You'll never guess that this works so well with like exactly what we're doing in the main line." And I was like, "No way!" And so we were able to kind of, I read every iteration of issue 18, and they fused together really, really well. And it's kind of what I think is so great about having the mainline comic series and then having spin-offs like Galaxies is that you almost get to see there's this sort of inciting incident, and then you don't just get to follow the main characters and main characters or like the main characters of the main series and what happens to them, but you can see from all these different perspectives the effect that this particular big event can have on all kinds of different Transformers. And so it was really neat to be able to sort of make a story that takes place simultaneously to show, that this has far-reaching effects.
And I think it's really interesting because that goes beyond just, Transformers 18 and Galaxies 7 through 9. Everyone on this, panel is basically writing a story about Transformers from the beginning. Like, that's what the ongoing in Galaxies is about. It's what Transformers 84 is about. In a very different way, that's what Transformers and Terminator is about, because it's about when they woke up on Earth in the 1980s. Like, there's a lot of similar thought that seems to be going into how to tell this Transformers story right now. And I'd like to say that I help influence that, but, it's also just everyone having good ideas.
Yeah, that actually brings up the thing. One of the things I wanted to talk about with everybody is the characters of Transformers. I mean, I think for probably for everybody watching the panel, or most of the people watching this, like, Transformers is about characters. Like that's I think that's a thing that's been a hallmark for the comics forever. I do think that isn't maybe the expectation that everybody has about the series, and it's maybe a learning curve for people to come in. But one of the things that also, knowing all 4 of your work, you all have very, knowing some of you from working with you directly and some of you just from looking on the outside, it seems like everybody has very particular characters that you like. And on the Galaxies and 18, or just because we're talking about that, there's the focus character is a character called Gage, who's new to this iteration of Transformers. So I don't. Can you talk about her a little bit, and then also just like the characters that you like, the ones that you like using? Sam.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, I got to basically invent a transformer, which is like the coolest thing that's ever happened to me. I felt very fortunate when I was like, oh, there's a blank slate transformer that we saw come out of the pyramid. Like, I wanted to jump on that, especially because I think it was a great opportunity to have RC and Greenlight work together as kind of like co-moms basically to this new like child transformer that has emerged, essentially fully grown but also still brand new in this world. I mean, I love what you guys did with Rubble. That was one of my inspirations for wanting to work with Gage. I thought that was such a great character and such a great fresh take and a great like entry point for people into the franchise. And so yeah, I wanted to sort of make another sort of fresh character that people could relate to. Maybe people who have never picked up Transformers before could find something new in this character. And it was really fun, from coming up with her name to working with Umi, our artist, on what she looked like, to working on what she transforms into, which you'll see at some point during Galaxies. It was a really neat and unique experience that I feel honored to have been a part of. So thank you guys.
And you carried it over to ponies.
Oh yeah, Gage shows up in the story with Pinkie Pie too. I mean, I guess I'm partial to her now, but that's sort of like, you know, I'm biased.
Yeah, I like her because of her name. It reminds me of Johnny Gage from the TV show Emergency, which, what did I say, was 25, which is a normal thing for a 25-year-old to say. Like Simon, you definitely have characters that, like, one that are like ones that you bring back and that are, I always think of as Simon characters. But you also are in probably a more unique position than the rest of us, in that I've always thought, and I don't know if I've ever asked you about this, your version of like Soundwave or even Optimus is, I think, comes from a different place than probably almost everybody else's, because I can't see Soundwave and not hear the cartoon Soundwave, and that's not your Soundwave. But so I don't know, two-part question to you, Simon.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's funny, favorite characters, I keep finding new favorite characters. You know, over the years, I've come to appreciate some of the lesser characters more than the bigger names. You know, I mean, I could write Grimlock till the cows come home, and, you know, I love all those characters, Optimus, all of them. But some of my favorites have become some of the smaller characters that never really got fleshed out, and suddenly you have got that more of a blank slate, you know, and it's liberating, and you can layer them and make them more interesting, and kind of the smaller the character, the better. And, you know, I've just been sort of rereading the Beast Wars series I did for IDW, and we had this nobody knew who he was character called Razor Beast, who was a warthog or something as a toy, and nobody really knew or cared about him. But it was just like, well, great, we can build a whole character there, and then the challenge comes in for you as a writer to make them interesting, to make fans, you know, on board with them. And so I think that's where I've been recently, and, you know, even recently with Punch Counterpunch, not a character I think I'd ever been near in even the UK stories, maybe once, and, you know, just a quick appearance. But suddenly it's like, wow, this character's great. He's neither Autobot or Decepticon, or which one is he? Or, you know, is he two different characters? Is he a split personality? Which is the real him? And suddenly you've got all this story potential that is just fantastic. And, you know, I love those characters like Grimlock, who aren't necessarily good guys or bad guys, or good gals or bad girls. You know, they're somewhere in the middle, and they tread a line, and they could go either way. And those have always been the characters that interest me. And, you know, it's nice to try and shade Optimus and these characters. You know, Optimus is a bit like Superman. It's hard to do much with them because they're iconic, they're so established. And like everyone says, you've got that idea of Peter Cullen doing the voice and the cartoon Optimus. But it's nice, you know, with Transformers 84 again, just to try and shade Optimus a bit into something a little, not exactly darker, but, you know, he's a man making tough decisions. And the consequences he then has to bear, and just try and layer in all the time. And Transformers, right from the start with Bob Budiansky's character profiles, it was all there. And I was helped so much by this amazing Bible of backgrounds, weaknesses, likes, dislikes. So the hard work was done, and then it just becomes, you can layer and shade a little bit as you go along.
David, in the Transformers Terminator, like kind of the cast was to some degree set, because it's kind of a take on the original Transformers stories. I mean, sort of, I think, kind of walks the line between the comics and the cartoon, with the idea of the Ark crashing and stuff. So most of the cast was sort of set, but you definitely got a chance to kind of bring in some other characters. And I sit down, like in normal circumstances, I sit down the hall from you. So I know you've got an extensive collection, but also an extensive interest in some of the characters. What are your favorites, or what are the things that drew you to the characters you brought in?
Who, me? Well, I mean, let's face it, Linda Hamilton is an amazing actress, and so of course Sarah Connor's going to be the star of the series. No, but in terms of Transformers, I think the kind of deep pull for the series will be showing up in one of the later issues is Velocity, who is an original Transformer from the More Than Meets the Eye run. And I find myself gravitating towards Transformers, that I see in the various bits of fiction that particularly IDW has published. Like, a lot of my favorites are people who have had their stories defined by James or you, John, or I really love Gage now because she's new and she's part of, something that I have some involvement in. And then I just love the silly guys. I've always said that my favorite Transformer ever is the Beast Wars character Randy, because he just has a guy's name. He's just a warthog named Randy, and that's the silliest thing that I have ever heard for a Transformer, but it just kind of delights me. So, I try to bring in those guys, and also Starscream, because he's just probably the most fun to write.
You should do a Randy story and have him sound like Randy of the Redwoods from MTV, which again is a reference any 22-year-old like myself would casually make. Brian, you had a clean slate, most recently, to kind of bring in what characters we were going to focus on, who were going to be the main characters, and also I remember talking to you a little bit about this, talking to you and David about it. Just from my own experience, it is so easy for that cast to blow up and become about everybody and then about nobody, and really recommending to kind of focus in on at least for the beginning of the series, a core set of characters, and then kind of build it out. But who did you pick? How did you pick them? What were your thoughts on that? How did that all come about?
There was early on in the sort of planning of the series and developing the storylines and stuff, there was not instructions or whatever, but there was a very sensible idea to try and keep the focus fairly tight, at least early on. And I actually, I kind of deliberately went for relatively well-known characters on the whole, as the initial sort of core cast. So people like Prowl and, Bumblebee and Chromia and Windblade and so on all show up quite early in the series and hang around early on. I mean, the truth is, I totally agree that was the way to start it. At some point in developing and writing the series, I decided I was going to assume that I could include anybody from anywhere in minor roles, if nothing else, and could just start go sort of digging around in the history of the Transformers franchise for any characters I sort of like to look at, like the look of. while trying to, I mean, it may not be always obvious to readers of the series, but that core cast that shows up in the first 5, 6, 7, whatever issues, actually kind of stays as the consistent thread through a lot of the series as it goes on, and most of them will continue to do so, because I do think it's quite important you have that kind of somewhat focused line of characters that the reader can hold on to. But I am quite deliberately peppering anybody and everybody in around the edges that I think is fun. And to be honest, I'm not quite as ridiculous as deciding that someone called Randy the Warthog is my favorite Transformers character, but I am pretty shallow about a lot of it, in that I do kind of pick characters who I like, whose visuals I like, or whose name I like, or, I mean, one of my favorite characters to write is Flame War, who's this relatively obscure female Transformer from a long, not very high profile past. But I just love her name. I like the way she looks, but I love her name. And it's the kind of name, when you hear a character's called Flame War, you immediately have some kind of idea about how you might want to write that character or what you can do with it. So I'd just include her, and, you know, now she'll keep showing up fairly regularly because I've decided I really like her. So, you know, sometimes these things are fairly shallow decisions.
Well, you know, speaking of characters, I think one of the most important things about Transformers comics, and it isn't something we've talked about, and it isn't something that we really have here on this panel, are the artists that we work with. Because I think drawing Transformers is such a unique and distinct thing. You know, working on, you know, for On Comics and the editorial side for a long time, it's definitely something where most comics, you can look at somebody and kind of figure out how they're going to draw it. You know, if it's a, you know, whether it's a superhero thing, if they draw Batman, you know how they're going to draw Captain America mostly. Or, you know, a crime comic, you know how, you know, Sean Phillips would approach a horror comic or something. But there's nothing like that from like jumping from a regular, like anything any reasonable person would draw to drawing Transformers, because it's so hard. Not only on the technical side, right, but like also getting the emotions out of the characters and making them feel like people. You know, making you forget that they're made of metal. I think I've always thought we've managed to have an incredible cast of artists on the IDW books, but I wanted to go through everybody that we're working with now and see how their relationship is. Simon, you're working with Guido Guidi on Transformers '84, and he's done a few retro, you know, like visually retro books in the past, but also very modern looking stuff. And JP Bove is doing the colors on it, kind of give it a retro look. But what's I know you've worked with Guido a number of times in the past, but what's your relationship? How does it work? All that.
Well, I mean, Guido is, I mean, he's an amazing artist, but he's also a chameleon of an artist. You know, I still remember we asked him to pitch in on Regeneration 1 for Andrew once. He couldn't do the monthly book. And somehow he managed to meld his style with Andrew's in a way that, you know, okay, we had Stephen Baskerville inking some of it, but it still looked amazingly, you know, there were no bumps in the road with him. So he was great. And, you know, I think he is, I mean, I think, you know, all the artists working currently are just amazing. You know, back in the day with Marvel UK, I think everyone was finding their feet, you know, complaining a little bit about having to draw robots. But now we've got this generation of artists who grew up with it, you know, are passionate about it. And so they're just amazing. And, you know, all the ones I've worked with, Don Figueroa, Guido, EJ Sue, you know, it's almost like there's nothing you can't ask them to do that they can do now. And Guido, it's just like, well, we need to retro design everybody. We need to get it looking slightly like the Marvel comic, but we don't want it to be a retro looking comic. We want it to look like a modern comic still. JP, we need you to do the coloring in a slightly retro way, but again, don't make it look like an old comic book. So, you know, it's that amazing adaptability. And Guido, there's just nothing you can throw at him, it seems, that he can't, you know, just blow your mind away with. And it must be difficult for him using source material the way we're doing with 84 and not feeling, you know, limited by that. But somehow he's made, you know, I don't think it's a spoiler to say we have the Shockwave Dinobots clash from the, well, what used to be the Savage Land and is now just a little bit of prehistoric Earth.
The what? No.
But, you know, somehow you just think, well, how difficult is it to draw that in a way that isn't just mimicking or drawing on that original stuff, but, you know, the stuff I've seen is just, you know, to die for on that. And, you know, he manages to make it Guido, you know it's Guido, but it's not Guido. He's amazingly adaptable, and, you know, combined with JP's colours, it just has this whole feel to it, this consistency, and it does tread that line between retro and now sort of brilliantly. So I've kind of been blessed by that creative team.
I've known him for years, and apparently I've been saying his name wrong the whole time. So my apologies, Guido. That's why I've worked with him on a bunch of stuff. He did that retro style on an annual I worked on. It was one of my favorite comics that he did half of it, and Brendan Cahill did the other half, and it was just one of my favorite pieces, where he was definitely mimicking issue 1. That was the whole premise. He's fantastic. On Galaxies 7 through 9, Sam, you're working with Beth McGuire Smith, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I've written 5 issues now of Transformers, and I've had the incredible honor of working with 4 different women artists over the course of those 5 issues. So it's actually been incredibly cool to be writing these sort of like Lady Transformers focused comics, and then to have these like really women focused teams on the creative side as well is very cool. I think the statistic is something like only 16% of comics creators are women or non-binary. So to be able to put these groups together, I think David and John, you guys did an amazing job. So on Galaxies, Umi Meow, I feel like I'm saying right, Meow, or just did the design for Gage, which is phenomenal, and drew the first issue. And then Bethany McGuire Smith did issues 7 and 8, which was very cool. And they're both incredible. And on Transformers My Little Pony, I got to work with Sarah Peter Durocher and Priscilla Tramontano. Yeah. They're both fantastic. And for me, it's like the amount of detail and just finickiness that goes into the art of every single issue of Transformers like blows my mind, and I think it's magic. I don't know how anyone who draws these comics does it. It's beyond me. It's incredible. Umi and Beth are both like sort of new to this new iteration. I mean, they're not new anymore, but like they're still relatively they're relatively new, but like Sarah, I would literally work with on anything in the world. She's one of my just absolute favorite people to work with, just flat out. And Priscilla as well. Like I've been so lucky to get to work with her on some of my favorite comics that I worked on too. They're both fantastic. Brian, right? There've been a number of artists working on the main series. Right now, it's Anna Malkova on number 20. But you've definitely had a chance to work with some. Like a talented roster of really great creators, some of whom were brand new to Transformers, some of whom were or Transformers comics anyway, some of whom are old standbys. How's that been? How's it going? How much do you have a chance to work, specifically for those artists?
Well, we've had, maybe David knows, I couldn't tell you how many individual artists have worked on those first 19 or so issues that have come out. We've had quite a few. I think it is, but yeah, sort of recently, in the recent issues, I think it's fair to say it's settled down to Anna Markova and Beth doing a lot of the heavy lifting, certainly on the recent issues. To be honest, I mean, it's like everyone said, every single artist who's worked on anything I've written, as a writer, you just sit there in kind of awe at what emerges, particularly for something like Transformers, because as people have said, it is just so astonishingly, not just technically difficult, but the whole thing of getting emotion and response out of robot characters that half of them don't even have faces. You know, they have visors. And I've seen, I've seen things in some of the issues I've written where, you know, the tilt of a head and the tiniest difference in the angle of an eye or something like that actually manages to convey emotion that, you know, me as someone who can barely make stick figures coherent, you know, can't even imagine how they go about doing that and conceive of it. But it has, I mean, it's been fantastic. And in terms of actually writing, not so much writing for artists, but I think particularly on an ongoing series where you have an extended run of issues, I think people sometimes underestimate how the art can actually end up informing the writing as it goes on. Because there have been definite times when the way I've seen an artist interpret a scene has influenced the way I then write the character in the future and construct other scenes. And I think that I mentioned Flame War before, and I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying that Flame War's first appearance in the comic was drawn by Anna Malkova. And just those 2 or 3 pages that she did of this character, who obviously I got the bare bones of the personality there in the script, but the way, just the gestures and the body language of the character and the expressions then went on to influence the way I wrote the character through succeeding issues and made it a better character than it would have been otherwise.
Oh. And then David on Transformers Terminator, the two of us, and Tom Waltz, who's the other writer on it, who I don't think we've mentioned, but we don't really need to talk about Tom. No, Tom's great, but you might know him from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and all kinds of stuff. But our artist on that is, I think, a newcomer to the Transformers, Alex Milne or something. No, it's Alex Milne, of course, who's drew More Than Meets the Eye, drew. I've had the chance to work with them on a bunch of stuff like Rom Micronauts, the Unicron series. I've known Alex for, you know what, the last couple of weeks seemed like 100 years, so I was gonna say 100 years, so I guess it's probably 1,000 years now. But this is your first chance to work with him as a writer, right, David? You've worked with him as an editor before.
Yeah, this is my first time working with Alex as a writer. And it's really exciting because, you know, as I think everyone who's read a Transformers comic drawn by Alex knows, he is incredibly kinetic and has such a great handle on these characters and getting that sort of emotion out of them, setting up panels in a way that, you know, the steely-faced, literally, Optimus Prime, like, can be heroic or can be emotive, and he's also doing a really great job translating that with someone who, in some ways, I think is almost even harder to draw because he is so close to being a human in his form, which is the Terminator. Like, some of the Transformers at least have teeth that can smile, but the Terminator doesn't. He's pretty locked into place, and it's really cool to see Alex take whatever we write and really elevate it. I know we've talked about this in the past on panels like this, but Alex also just has such a good sense of storytelling that you put something on the page and you get a page back that has extra panels because he's figured out a way in which he can communicate, you know, the story through the art better by just having more story on the page. So yeah, it's been phenomenal writing for Alex and getting to, you know, stretch my legs and know, he can handle this if I write something difficult.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, one of the things I think is unique to Transformers. I mean, it's not literally unique to Transformers artists, but it's very specific. Is there's kind of no reason for you to be drawing Transformers except that you really love Transformers. Because if you're that good, you're probably able to draw a lot of other stuff and that are easier to draw. So that's a thing that I've always seen is everybody's, all the artists that I've ever worked with come back with not only not only the storytelling, I mean that too, but then also just the like actual story points or actual things about how the characters work or the world works. This is kind of behind the scenes, but and I don't know if I should talk about it, but probably have on panels before that. Like when I was editing More Than Meets the Eye, there were multiple arguments about how doors worked. And I've never had an argument about how doors function on any other comic I've edited, and I've edited a lot of comics, and it happened multiple times on that because, yeah, Alex and James both thought the stuff through so much, you know. Have there been any experiences from anybody of things like that where there's been like a thing that you hadn't maybe considered, but the artists you've been working on have come in with like a real thought that changes the character, like you said, Brian, but also I realize pointing at you and making eye contact doesn't help. But anything like that stand out for the books we've been talking about?
I leave my scripts really open to art interpretation. I try to be as collaborative as I can with the artists, even when working through an editor like David, who is great. But a lot of my stuff is like, make them look sad. And like, you know, whether that be like oil tears or whatever the artist that I'm like, to Brian's point, I can't draw a stick figure. So when I'm making my art notes or my panel notes, they're sort of like best guess from a writer's perspective. And I would much rather have, you know, work with an artist like Alex or like Umi or Beth, who have been wonderful to work with in this way too, where I'm just kind of like, this is like, I'm gonna do something like that. And then they just make it a million times better than I could ever dream up on my own, because they're so talented at like, you know, visual storytelling, spatial awareness, panel layout, expressions, especially with Transformers, all this stuff. So it's, for me, I really enjoy being open-ended or flexible with the art.
To what Sam was saying, you know, there's a sequence, a double-page spread in issue 8 where the whole story, for the most part, takes place on one ship. Mm-hmm. And Beth does a spread where she really defines what the ship looks like as a person is basically just going downstairs. But I think it informs so much of what the rest of the issue is and then into the next issue, because it's a really cool way to visualize, you know, this ship and this world and build upon that.
You know, it's funny, back when I was working with EJ on Infiltration, because we were starting from the ground up, you know, it really helped me just to let go a little bit and let EJ do his stuff, because EJ was brilliant at real world. You know, it felt like the first real world Transformers series I'd ever done, in that it really was set in the here and now and things were real. And if you asked him to draw a bus station, you got a bus station. And, you know, and I think it's really great. And that's why I love working with artists over a period of time, because you do start to let go and just trust them. And, you know, with EJ and with, you know, with many of the artists I've worked with, you build up that relationship where your scripts, like you were saying, get sparer and you're putting less detail in for the artist because you trust them to know exactly where you're going. And, you know, I know when I work with Nick Roach, he is a writer and artist. So you know, you can let go of the sides so much more when you're working with an artist as well who understands the writing process. So, you know, I think the current generation of artists, though, I can't think of anyone now who doesn't just put about 6 times as much as I asked for in the script into every page. And Alex is, you know, probably the king of that, for just, you know, you get the pages back and it takes you a good while just to digest each page because he's put so much into each one. So, you know, it's an incredible, you know, there's no bad artists working at the moment at all in Transformers because they love it so much.
I think it's kind of interesting that we're all clearly on vaguely the same page, because I think maybe it's a thing about Transformers that you can put, I don't know how many people watching this have seen a comic script or something, but you can describe a panel in 1 or 2 sentences that some of these artists will then go and spend sort of a day or two blowing up into this whole vision of a world that contains far more than you actually put in that panel description. And it is kind of mind-blowing. I mean, obviously, comics writers are creative geniuses, but it does make you slightly wonder sometimes about who gets the correct share of credit for some of the stuff that ends up on the page.
Oh yeah, I'm 100% expendable. I'm lucky to be here every day. I can't draw to save my own life. All these artists one day are going to be like, I could just write this, and we're going to be out, so we might as well enjoy it while it lasts.
I worry about that all the time, because writing really isn't that hard compared to what they're doing.
That's actually, I mean, I know I've told the story. This is a story I always think of whenever I hear that. And one of my 5 stories I tell all the time. But I used to work with former Transformers artist Brian Hitch on some other series, and he had the story about working on a comic called The Authority that Warren Ellis was writing. And there's a sequence in there where the Earth is being invaded by Britain from another dimension, and the United States Air Force is coming in to intercept. And there's a 2-page spread, and the script for it, as Brian described it, the script was "The Fleets Engage." And it was a week of Brian's life. That's the Fleets Engage is always, it's been an in-joke with like Andrew Griffith and me for years. Because I do that to him all the time. You know, okay, there's a crowd scene with 1,000 Transformers on the ground.
Yes.
Fight.
That's what I aspire to now. You've given me something to aim for. I'm going to pare down my 1 and 2 sentence panel descriptions are clearly far too wordy.
There's a scene in I think way back in Dark Cybertron that Alex was drawing that I remember being 5 billion these aliens are coming towards there. And he's like, 5 billion. I'm like, listen, Alex, you can draw like 500,000 and nobody's really gonna know.
Benevolent.
All right, well, we're coming up on out of time. I want to thank everybody for being here. And I guess if there's anywhere else, we should check you out. Be it social media, be it other comics in addition to there. We'll run through in how about reverse order from what we started with. Brian.
I am on social media. Twitter is the only one I pay terribly much attention to be honest. But you can find me there. I think it's Brian_Ruckley.
David?
You can also find me on Twitter. I'm at IDW_David_M. And then please read all of the IDW comics that I and everyone else here works very hard on. Besides Transformers, you can also find me editing Sonic the Hedgehog, Kanto, and a bunch of other really good titles.
Simon?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook and Twitter and fairly active on both, and we currently, Jeff Senior and I are self-publishing a comic, and we have a website that we also tend to and keep an eye on, and social media accounts for that.
Sam?
Yeah, I'm just on Twitter and Instagram mostly. My handle is just my name, Sam Eggs, with 2 G's and 2 M's. You can please check out my Transformers stuff when it comes out, as well. The first trade for Marvel Action Captain Marvel Cosmic Catastrophe is already out. And one thing I really did want to ask anybody watching is I just was part of a pro bono charity project with 2 of my editors at IDW, Megan Brown and Elizabeth Bray. It's called Insider Art. We're releasing a digital comics anthology that I have a story in, and all the proceeds go to benefit female comic book retailers. So Google Insider Art and check it out.
Fantastic. And I'm sorry for everybody out there, we didn't get your questions. You in Sao Paulo, no, in the green. Yeah, I'm sorry, but we ran out of time. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you all for joining me here. This has been a lot of fun, and always great working with you, and I hope we get to do it for a very long time.
Thanks, John.
All right. So thanks a lot, and roll out.